Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Debate Aya program with your host Tariq Khan. Today we'll explore and analyze cyber war, hybrid warfare, and its implications over the globe, especially in the context of Pakistan. Let me bring our guest in program, Ms. Mubin Ashraf. You are researcher on strategic or defense issues. Mubin, thank you so much for joining, and you are most welcome in program.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
Ms. Mabin, how would you analyze cyber war or cyber weapons and how did they evolve over the time? How would you analyze this?
First, I'll answer how they are evolved, and then I'll move to the definition of cyber weapons. Basically, they have been existing since long, but the debate on cyber weapons actually evolved over time, and we see that we see in literature that in 1995 Matthew G. Littenton basically described weapons that cyber terrorists use in the cyberspace, and he never mentioned cyber weapons, but obviously we know that any weapon that is used by cyber terrorists is used in the cyberspace. So we analyzed and we inferred that these are cyber weapons. Then he actually elaborated three types of cyber weapons that cyber terrorists use. One is cyber weapon of mass destruction, mass disruption, and mass distraction. And this is how they evolved. We have, and there is a lot of debate on how and like do weapons of mass destruction in cyberspace exist or not. But we have overcome that, and most of the scholars and practitioners have agreed to the point that yes, weapons of mass destruction exist in the cyberspace apart from the conventional terms. Then we have cyber weapons of mass distraction and disruption. These are the most favorable choices of cyber criminals, hacktivists, cyber terrorists, and that we see in our daily lives as well. Not like we don't see it in our daily lives, but yes, those who overcome these attacks, they do see that. And examples of all these types maybe we can actually analyze, and we can actually think of certain examples where we see that if any news agencies like renowned news agencies website gets hacked, what will happen? It may present some news that may create havoc among the masses. And what will that do? Any type of like news, and that what that will make, that can cause injuries, that can cause even deaths, and that can cause a chaos among masses, online and physical. So all these things are interlinked. Any weapon that is used for disruption and distraction can be a cause of destruction as well. And with that in mind, we move towards the definition of what cyber weapons actually are. Basically, these cyber weapons have not been defined anywhere apart from the Tallinn manual that was used in Estonia. That was not used in Estonia. That was made after Estonians get attacked in 2007. And we have a Tallinn manual that elaborates and that discusses the threats and how to counter them, maybe in a book, in a manual. And we see there is a mean, a tool, and the amount of harm that a weapon inflicts upon anything, be it infrastructure or masses or any other object. And the problematic issue is that we don't know what is the context. Like if anything that is used in the context of cyber warfare, we call it a cyber weapon. But if it is not, we don't call it a weapon. But over the years, agencies, militaries, intelligence agencies have been using these weapons for intelligence gathering and all that stuff, and that varies. Military domain, military side of cyber weapons, and state-centric cyber weapons differentiate from each other because the intent and the harm both are different in these cases. So what matters it, like in a layman's language, I would rather say that any code that is generated for inflicting harm upon the infrastructure or like critical infrastructure in the context of cyber warfare, we say that is a cyber weapon. That is what I want to say about cyber weapons and the evolution of them.
Mubin, how cyber weapons have changed the overall landscapes or framework of modern warfare? How would you analyze this?
For me, like after researching a lot on the cyber weapons, I think that cyber weapons have already changed the landscape of modern warfare, because these modern wars are not fought on battlegrounds with tanks and soldiers. These modern wars are fought online. They are fought on social media. They are fought on different websites through different malicious codes, and and through those malicious codes, we, like states and criminals and other actors like APT groups and all that, they target the opponent's critical infrastructure in a way that it may cause physical destruction, it may cause the chaos in the system, in the overall working of all those organizations even. And we have plenty of examples in that case. First of all, starting from Estonia in 2007, when Estonians had a great, like we say, faced a massive cyber attack on their critical infrastructure sites. Then one of the incident that is studied extensively still now is of Stuxnet, that was used in Iran by many states, including Israel, America, Netherlands, Germany, and these states actually planned a massive cyber attack using a super cyber weapon that is known as Stuxnet, and they targeted Iran's nuclear facility, Natanz nuclear facility, and with that the centrifuges were harmed, and they manipulated the PLCs, and we see what happened till now. And the surprising factor is that those states who planned this Stuxnet game, they are actually fearing another Stuxnet on them, and they don't have that what we can say defense, cyber defense, where they can halt such type of attacks. So that means that it's easier for us to it is easier for states to develop cyber offensive weaponry than to have a cyber defense. Okay, then we move towards WannaCry, NotPetya, and then we have Mirai botnet, the latest one. We see in WannaCry and NotPetya that two of the vulnerabilities were stolen from NSA of America, and they were used by different groups, I would rather say. And they actually, what they did was, that was actually a ransomware attack. And in ransomware attacks, what happens is that if your system is compromised, it may not be unlocked until or unless you pay a ransom in return. And what happened in WannaCry's case, that happened in 2017, like out of like many states, 151 states systems were compromised, and they had to pay a ransom in the form of bitcoins to the hacktivist sitting on the other side of the system. And this was actually done because it was made easier for other groups to actually exploit the vulnerabilities, because Microsoft released a patch earlier, but no state, actually most of the states didn't didn't updated their systems, and that was a favorable target for the hacktivist and the other groups and states even to target those vulnerabilities. Then another variant, it is not a variant, but the same vulnerabilities were used in NotPetya's case when another state's systems were compromised, and it created a havoc. And then we have Mirai botnet. What Mirai botnet is, it's actually it's actually an IoT based botnet, And IoTs are actually Internet of Things, and it includes various CCTVs and all those devices that are extremely vulnerable, but most of the time they are ignored, that they can be a threat to the national securities even, but they did. And it happened, and now from now onwards, like from 2018 and onwards, there have been tremendous programs organized to halt and to protect these most vulnerable devices, like Mirai botnets. And then we have another like very important yet dangerous tool, that is social media. Social media can be used as a cyber weapon, because all of the characteristic that scholars have described about cyber weapons, like the mean, tool, extent, and the context, they're all fulfilled in the case of social media. Because in many cyber warfare strategies, although cyber warfare, according to many authors, has not existed till now, but yes, there's a likely possibility that it is going to occur in the future. So social media is used for many warfare, like not warfare, but different operations. And even when we start from Stuxnet, the exploitation of nuclear scientists through social media, and then use of social media to manipulate the elections of USA by Russia, and then USA's other programs like Fronton and all that, they are used, like they have states have agencies that have these what we can say, that operate just to gather information and to launch their operations on social media. So we have dark web there, we have other routers that facilitate the criminals and states and terrorists to fulfill their agenda. So this is how the landscape of modern warfare has been changed and is continuously changing, because when we have cyber weapons, that is cyber warfare, then we have cyber electronic warfare, and then we have AI warfare, then we have cyber AI warfare, and like all these things are connected but yet evolving. So this is how the landscape of modern warfare is changing.
Mubin, what are the different policy options to counter the threats posed by cyber weapons, and how would you analyze this?
Thank you so much for this question. But we actually, the foremost strategy for a state in terms of cyber weapons, we see that we first of all we have to increase our cyber defenses, which is a trickier task. Like it's more trickier than a cyber offense, because all the states, according to my research, they like most of the states, they are working on enhancing their cyber offensive capabilities, but most of them are not working on like they are ignoring the aspect of cyber defense. Although we in Pakistan we have cyber defensive like we have the organizations, and people are working extensively on it, and we are actually successfully combating these risks, but the level of offense is higher than that of defense. So even if we see the previous examples, we have we had to encounter WannaCry, because we didn't update our systems. And then what happened in the other cases, we don't have patches, timely patches that may like culminate this menace. So we have certain strategies that are also debatable, since this domain is highly complex. So all the things are still in the evolving process, and they are on and off debated among scholars and practitioners. So we have certain strategies which we call like the tactics in cyber deterrence. Cyber deterrence, unlike nuclear deterrence, has many complexities, as I stated earlier. First of all, let me begin with what cyber deterrence is. It is what according to us, like if a state like stops or deters an enemy or opponent to commit any action, undesired action, that comes in the domain of deterrence, right? And then we have two types of deterrence, that is deterrence by denial and then deterrence by punishment. Deterrence by denial is we are actually practicing. Most of the states are practicing, and then deterrence by punishment is a gray one. We see deterrence by punishment. We have many, like, not so examples, but we have just examples of threats. Like, if we have a massive cyber attack, a massive cyber attack can cause a massive, maybe a nuclear attack, and these political consequences are actually always in hand. And this is also known as active deterrence, and cyber deterrence by denial, also known as passive deterrence. So we have a number of tactics used in the deterrence, like we say, process. We first of all, we have any state that wants to deter an opponent for opponent any action that is against their national interest or national security. What they do is they pose sanctions. And we have seen that in the Soleimani case, General Soleimani case, when he was killed, America and Iran, they were both in that process, because one state was waging a cyber war against the other, and then they put sanctions on each other. And then we have the most favorable target we can always, any state and any organization can always have is setting up protection. When we set up protection, we have like now artificial intelligence is always also involved in it. So we have defenses like AI based cyber defenses. So that enhances the game. But what my contention is, my point of contention here is that to unknown cyber offensive threats, we cannot actually, like, it's my opinion, like purely my opinion, that if we don't know a particular threat, how far we can go for the cyber defense, because any antivirus or any anti-DDoS may counter those threats that are known to the industry, right? And those that are not known cannot be countered, and it takes a big deal. We have, and these cyber weapons, unlike other normal, like, low potential cyber attacks, they are highly sophisticated and are a work of states and what we say, states and big groups. So to counter these things, we need to have like sophisticated cyber defense. So setting up protection is one way, is a good way, but it's still lacking behind. And it actually involves active cyber defense in it, which I have already stated. And then we have because why we do this? We do this to protect our systems, our organizations, and that we have a CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, availability of businesses. And then another favorable but not so relevant to the cyberspace is an option of building international norms and laws. And because, as I have stated earlier, that we don't have a definition to, because most of the states they are not interested in it, maybe, and they are keeping on developing these weaponries, and they are not they don't want they don't want themselves to restrict. They don't want themselves to restrict in terms of proliferating these offensive weaponries. So we have so this option is also not working much, but it may work. And many other organizations, they are working on like banning the AI weaponry and when banning all these things, because once we have the desired norms, because since cyberspace is already complex, so we don't know, we have so many problems in it, because attribution is there, confidentiality is there, we have so many things, because if any person if any person or an organization maybe is working for another state maybe, but staying in another state, right? So who to blame, right? This is where the norms and laws actually part ways, because this problem arises. And then the most difficult one, not difficult one, but the most dangerous one is to stockpile cyber weapons. Unlike, like I said, unlike nuclear weapons, if we have many weapons, nuclear weapons, and we have tanks and we have guns with us, what they do is they can be used as an effective deterrent. But for cyber weapons, we see that we cannot have this weapon like we cannot stockpile. We cannot tell the other state to not to stockpile these weapons because nobody knows it. Even your friendly neighbors, they don't even get an idea that how much of effective weaponry they have in process. So this is how like this is another option, but the dangerous one. But yes, this is another tactic of effective cyber deterrence. And then related to the previous one, um, there is always a possibility of a cyber attack to another cyber attack, but the more dangerous one, right? And this is one of another cyber deterrence tactics where an adversary or the opponent may counter attack in response to any other. And then we have cyber diplomacy in place, and this diplomacy actually works, and states are actually working. Even in Pakistan, there is a debate going on over cyber diplomacy and how states can interact and they can sort issues, cyber issues out.
Now, Bean, how would you analyze cyber weapons threat to national security, especially in the context of Pakistan?
Thank you so much. Actually, when we talk about the global implications of cyber weapons, we see that like first of all, when we talk about the global implications of cyber weapons, we have one thing in place, and there's one thing that pops up, and that is about the economy. And now, as I said, the landscape of modern warfare has changed. So now, instead of targeting the militaries and on battlegrounds and their uh, places, what the nation states and other criminals are doing, they are actually targeting the economy of the other state, because all the things that all these states and every state is dependent on is the economy. So we see plenty of examples in that manner, and I've already discussed the case of WannaCry and NotPetya. We have Duke ransomware, we have ZS Trojans, we have many others that have caused financial losses to the states, individual groups like companies, and to like many other things. So then we have the other thing that comes in our mind is of the cyberspace. Like when all these cyber weaponry, offensive cyber weaponry is used in the cyberspace, we see that they are actually weaponizing the cyberspace, and in that case, they are actually militarizing the cyberspace. So this weaponizing and militarizing of cyberspace is causing implications on the national and international security as a whole, national security of the individual states and international security overall. Then we have, coming back to the national security of Pakistan, we see that Pakistan is surrounded by some tricky neighbors, including Afghanistan, Iran, and India. And the rift between India and Pakistan is seen in actions of both the states since independence. So the exchange of fire at the borders, nuclear threats, terrorist attacks, civil rights movements incited by external actors, and wars are all common trends in Indo-Pak rivalry. And however, the recently acknowledged factor that added colors to the rivalry is through the use of hybrid or modern warfare techniques. So now what they do, now what the states, and this is actually a trendy topic for some years in Pakistan and India as well, and how cyber warfare, like hybrid warfare, is aggravating the existing situation. So coming starting from Iran and coming to India at the end, we see that when Stuxnet happened in 2010 on Iran, because that was a huge blow to their national security, because their nuclear facility was targeted and it was harmed. like hundreds of centrifuges were harmed actually. So what in retaliation, what Iran did, Iran actually equipped herself in a number of ways, like in like for the offensive cyber capabilities, and started planning a retaliatory mission and attack on the states that actually harmed Iran's nuclear like national security. So in doing so, what Iran did was Iran launched an operation that is known as Operation Cleaver against certain states, including USA, UK, China. And what happened is any attack that is being waged on from one state to the other, it may cause national it may carry national implications, but it may grasp the whole region into it. And what we see is Pakistan was also affected in that case. And then we have examples from USA, and we see that after disrupting Iran's nuclear facility, the next target that the US government had in mind was Pakistan. And the easiest way to do was to use the war on terror as a tool. According to there are many scholars who have actually studied this aspect, and one from the Silicon Valley actually, he's an analyst. He explains that USA planned to wage a cyber attack on Pakistan's air defense systems to block the detection of helicopters during Bin Laden's raid in Abbottabad. And then by using Black Hawk helicopters and all that stuff in Abbottabad. And then Edward Snowden revealed what NSA was doing, and it revealed that Pakistan is the second most spied country on the NSA's list. And we have numerous other examples where internet service providers based in Pakistan, preferably PTCL Gateway Exchange, Multinet, Micronet, they are compromised. And all these incidents actually took place in we say 2003 and 2004 and 5. And then coming to the Afghanistan, we see that Pakistan and Afghanistan, they actually maintain bilateral relations, but what they do is to aggravate the situation between both the countries, these cyber terrorists and hacktivists have actually played a great role. And the recent incident that we can count on is that is available in public. We see that in 2018, hacking email accounts of 2 Afghan diplomats in Pakistan were hacked, and this actually, all these things are interlinked. Politically, these things are interlinked, and inciting comments through and by Pashtun Tahaffuz movement and all that stuff. So then comes India's factor, and we see this rivalry is not new and can never be. So we in first to highlight some of the points, I can say that there is a company that is a tech company, US-based tech company named after NetScout, identifies several advanced persistent threats APT groups. The company mentioned that 3 Pakistani and 6 Indian APT groups fighting a war in cyberspace over Kashmir. So what we see is that this is the height of actually cyber rivalry these states are facing, and there are many other examples. It takes a great deal. We need to have another hour to discuss all these in detail, but the use of social media and hacking the websites of education, educational websites, university websites, and ministries websites. And in retaliation, if one state does something, the other state does it with an effect 10 times worse than the previous one. So this is how the national security and international security is connected, and these weapons are actually posing a great threat to the securities and of national and international platforms. And we have many, if any, we have faced targets. We have faced many cyber attacks on our banking industry, and we know that if a state bank's website is hacked, what havoc that can create. And then we see in the recent post-pandemic period, we have NCOC, that is actually all like intelligence based and all that stuff. We see that if maybe that is hacked, what problems we Pakistanis can face, and we need to look after what the solutions can be, because we need to be prepared for the worst, because our enemy is smarter, and we should be prepared for the worst and be ready for the best, what we can say.
Mubin, thank you so much for your valuable and precious analysis on the topic hybrid warfare or cyber war. Thank you so much again for joining.
Welcome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.